polished floor of the wide hallway reflected the light like marble, gleaming as if it were full of stars. If you opened any of the doors to the right or left, the grandeur of the furnishings inside would take your breath away. Any non-member who came here would be amazed that such luxury could exist in this legendary place, the notorious Great Tomb of Nazarick. Largest army in the game's history, an alliance of 8 guilds, plus other affiliated guilds, mercenary players, mercenary non-player characters, and so on, totaling 500 men, had once arrived on a punitive expedition only to be completely wiped out. The Great Tomb of Nazarick was originally constructed with 6 levels, but after Aints Ulgaun conquered it, it was dramatically transformed. At present, there were 10 underground levels, each with its own distinct features. Levels 1 through 3 made up the grave. The 4th level was an underground lake. It was a glacier. 6 was a jungle. 7 was lava. 8 was wilderness. 9 and 10 were a shrine. This was the headquarters of a guild that broke the top 10 back in an era when there were thousands, the Guild of Aints Ulgaun. What better word for this world than divine? Momonga's footsteps echoed throughout the halls, accompanied by the hard clack of his staff on the floor. After walking a ways down the wide corridor and turning a number of corners, he saw a woman coming toward him from up ahead. She was gorgeous, with abundant blonde hair falling around her shoulders and distinctive facial features. Her clothing was a maid uniform with a broad apron and a long, unobtrusive skirt. She stood about 5 feet, 7 inches tall and had long, delicate limbs. Ample twin swells asserted themselves by straining against the chest of her outfit, but the overall impression she made was one of modesty. Soon the gap between them had closed. The woman moved into a nook and bowed deeply to Momonga. He responded with a small wave. Her expression didn't change. There was a very slight hint of a smile. It was difficult to tell if it was there or not, just as before. In Yggdrasil, expressions never changed, but in her case, the implication was a little different. This maid was an NPC. An NPC was a non-player character. She was not controlled by a human. She moved on her own, according to her AI, a program. Basically, she was a walking mannequin. No matter how sophisticated she was, or how politely she bowed, it was all according to her programming. Momonga's response might have seemed foolish to treat a mannequin this way, but there was a reason he wanted to show some consideration. The 41 NPC maids working in the Great Tomb of Nazarick were all based on custom drawings. The artist was a guild member who made his living as an illustrator. He was now serialized in a monthly manga magazine. Momonga gazed fixedly at the maid. He was looking at the girl, certainly, but mainly he was looking at her outfit. It was surprisingly detailed. The meticulous embroidery on the apron was especially impressive, but how could he expect anything less when the artist said, "A maid's uniform is a battle-deciding weapon"? Momonga fondly recalled the graphics producer's screams. He said, "Ah, right. Even back then he was all about maid uniforms for great justice. Actually, even the manga he's doing now has a maid as the heroine. Are you making your assistants cry with all the detail work, white lace?" Hirohiro had designed the AI program, along with 5 other mates. In other words, this maid was another former guild member's collaboration, so it would be sad to simply ignore her. Just like the staff of Aints Ulgaun, this maid was a shining memory of the good old days. As Momonga reminisced, the maid, who had straightened up, cocked her head as if to say, "May I help you?" Oh, is this the idle pose she would strike if you were near her for a certain amount of time? He searched his memory and was impressed by how detailed Hiro's program was. He knew there were other secret poses. He felt an urge to see them all, but unfortunately time was running out. He checked the semi-transparent watch face on his left wrist. He indeed had no time to waste. "Thanks for all your hard work," he said to the maid, feeling sentimental. Then he slipped by her. There was no reply, but he felt it was the proper thing to do on this last day. Leaving the maid behind, Momonga continued walking. It was not long before a grand staircase, with its primarily red carpeting, came into view. At least 10 people could walk abreast down it with their arms outstretched. Momonga slowly descended to the deepest level of the Great Tomb of Nazarick, the 10th level. The stairs led to an open hall where he found several people. The first one he saw was an old man superbly dressed in a traditional butler uniform. His hair was completely white, so was his beard, but his back was straight, like a sword blade. Wrinkles gave his chiseled Caucasian features an air of kindness, but his penetrating eyes were like those of a hawk targeting its prey. Behind him trailed 6 maids. These were equipped completely differently from the one before. They all wore armor based on manga-style made uniforms. The armor featured metal vambraces and greaves of silver, gold, black, and other colors. They wore white lace headpieces instead of helmets. Each maid carried a different weapon. Basically, they were maid warriors. Their hairstyles were varied as well: a chignon, a ponytail, a straight cut, braids, rolled curls, a French twist. The only thing they had in common was how beautiful they were, but even their beauty came in various types: bewitching, wholesome, Japanese. Naturally, they were also NPCs. Unlike the earlier one, who was made pretty much for kicks, these existed to intercept raiders. In Yggdrasil, there were perks for guilds who possessed a base of castle size or larger. There was one benefit: the base would be protected by NPCs. The Great Tomb of Nazarick had undead mobs. These mobs could be up to level 30, and it didn't cost the guild anything if they died. They would just respawn after a set amount of time. However, the appearances and AI of these auto-spawning NPCs couldn't be edited. This made them too weak to repel other players. Then there was another perk: the right to create the guild's own NPCs from scratch. Even a weak guild that occupied a base of at least castle size would get at least 700 levels to dole out to custom NPCs as they liked. Since the level cap in Yggdrasil was 100, one could, for example, make 5 level 100s and 4 level 40s. And for this type of NPC, it was possible to adjust their looks, AI, and gear for those who could equip it. With this system, guilds could station guards far stronger than the auto-spawning mobs at key locations. Of course, people weren't forced to create NPCs with combat in mind. There was one guild, the Great Cat Kingdom, that made all their NPCs cats or other members of the Feli D family. It wouldn't be mistaken to say that this ability was meant to bring out the personalities of the guilds. Momonga brought a hand to his chin and looked at the butler bowing before him. He didn't come here very often. He normally used teleportation magic to go from room to room. That must have been why the sight of the butler and maids here made him feel so nostalgic. He stretched his fingers out for the menu and opened up the members-only guild page. Checking a box that instantly caused the names of all the NPCs in the room to appear over their heads. "So that's what you're called." He cracked a smile. It was part pained wince for not remembering their names, but also part nostalgic grin. Memories of the dispute over what the names should be surfaced from his fragmented recollection. Sebas, the butler's background, said he could perform all the duties of a house steward. The team of combat maids, known as the Pleiades, reported directly to him. He was also in charge of the male servants and assistant butlers. There was probably more detailed background info in the text log, but Momonga wasn't interested in reading anymore. He didn't have much time left. He wanted to be sitting somewhere specific when the servers shut down. Incidentally, all the NPCs, including the maids, had detailed backstories. This was because Aints Ul Gown was full of people who loved to write them, and because there were so many illustrator and programmer members, everyone was really obsessed with getting the graphics right. This spurred on the writers' imaginations. Sebas and the maids were meant to be the last line of defense against raiders. It wasn't likely anyone could repel players who managed to penetrate this far, but at least the NPC guards could buy some time. That said, no players had ever gotten to the 10th level, so all the guards had ever done was wait. They had never received orders from anyone and just stood by wondering if or when an enemy would arrive. Momonga tightened his grip on the staff. It was stupid to feel sorry for NPCs. After all, they were just data. It seemed like they had emotions. It just meant the human who designed the AI had done a good job. But a guild master should make his NPCs work. He teased himself for sounding so arrogant, then added, "Follow me." Sebas and the maids acknowledged the order with a bow. Momonga's guildmates didn't intend for these NPCs to leave this area. Aints Ul Gown valued majority rule. It was unacceptable for one person to do what he wanted with things that everyone had made together. But it's the last day. Everyone would surely forgive me on the last day, he thought as he continued on, with multiple sets of footsteps sounding behind him. Presently they arrived at a large domed hall. Crystals in 4 colors on the ceiling gave off white light. There were 72 alcoves dug into the walls, most of which contained a statue. There were 67 statues in all, each in the form of a demon. This room was called Lemegeton, after the famed grimoire also known as the Lesser Key of Solomon. All of the statues were golems. They were carved from ultra-rare magical metals. The golems were based on Solomon's 72 demons. There were only 67 because the person making them got bored partway through. The crystals on the ceiling were monsters. During an enemy raid, they could summon the major elementals earth, wind, fire, and water. They could simultaneously bombard the enemy with wide-range area of effect magic attacks. If all of them were mobilized, it would be enough power to take out 2 parties of level 100 players. That's 12 people with ease. This room was the very last line of defense before entering the heart of the great tomb of Nazareth. Momonga took the servants with him as he crossed Lemegeton. He stood in front of a large door. It was huge, probably more than 16 feet tall, a double door with extraordinarily detailed carvings. A goddess was on the left and a demon on the right. They looked so real it seemed like they might jump off the door to attack. Despite that, Momonga was fairly sure they didn't move. If a bunch of heroes managed to get this far, we should welcome them. A lot of people say we're evil, so let's lie in wait for them here like final bosses. The suggestion was adopted by majority rule. Albert Elaine Oddle had been the most obsessed with the word evil of anybody in the guild. That guy just never got through adolescence. Momonga took another sentimental look around the grand hall. Okay, you're not going to attack me, right? His anxiety was not unwarranted. Even he didn't know how everything in this labyrinth worked. He wouldn't have been surprised if one of the retired members had left a twisted parting gift. The guy who made this door was definitely the type to do something like that. Once, he said he wanted to show Momonga a powerful golem he had just made. But when Momonga booted the golem up, a bug in the combat AI caused it to start throwing punches at him. He still wondered if that had been on purpose. Hey, Lucifer. If you attack me today of all days, I will be seriously angry. Momonga touched the massive door with caution, but his worries had been for nothing. It opened automatically, though slowly, with appropriate gravity. The mood changed. The previous room had been tranquil and solemn, like a shrine, but the scene here surpassed even that. The new atmosphere exerted a physical pressure. The exquisite workmanship could be felt weighing on one's entire body. The room was huge. 100 people could enter, and there would still be space left over. The ceilings were very high. The walls were primarily white with ornamentation done mainly in gold. Magnificent chandeliers hung from the ceiling. They were made of jewels in a rainbow of colors and cast a dreamy, sparkling light. Large flags hung on the walls from the ceiling to the floor. Each flag had a different crest. There were 41 in all. On the far side of this lavish gold and silver room was a short flight of 10 stairs. At the top was a throne carved out of a giant crystal. Its back practically reached the heavens. Behind it was a large scarlet tapestry. The tapestry bore the guild's crest. This was the most important location in the entire great tomb of Nazareth. It was the throne room. A wow escaped Momonga's lips as he admired the overwhelming room. He was sure the workmanship was the best, or maybe second best, in all of Yggdrasil. That made it a perfect place to spend the last few minutes of the game. The room was so large that the sound of his footsteps seemed to vanish as he entered. He eyed the female NPC standing next to the throne. She was gorgeous, wearing a snow-white dress. Her faint smile was like that of a goddess. Her lustrous hair was black, the exact opposite of her dress. It reached all the way to her waist. Her golden irises and vertical slit pupils were odd, but they didn't detract one bit from her peerless feminine beauty. She had thick horns that curled forward from her temples like a ram's, but that wasn't all. Black angel wings sprouted from her back near her hips. Perhaps because of the shadows caused by her horns, her goddess smile seemed like a mask hiding something else. She wore a glittering golden necklace that looked like a spiderweb covering her shoulders and chest. In her delicate silken gloved hands, she carried a strange wand-like object. It was about 18 inches long, and its end was tipped by a black orb that floated there with no supports. Momonga hadn't forgotten her name. How could he have? She was Albedo, captain of the Great Tomb of Nazareth's floor guardians. There were 7 floor guardians, and she oversaw them. She was the character at the top of the NPC hierarchy in the Great Tomb of Nazareth, which was why she was allowed to stand by in that innermost room. But there was some harshness in the way Momonga looked at her now. I knew there was one world item here, but why are there two? There were only 200 of these extraordinary items in Yggdrasil. Each world item contained a unique power. There were even game-breaking items that allowed their owner to demand the admins change a part of the game system. Of course, not all of them were so extravagant. Even so, if a player owned one can imagine how far their reputation would spread. Aints Ulgaun was in possession of 11 world items. That was more than any other guild, far more, in fact. The guild with the next most had only 3. Of Aints Ulgaun's world items, Momonga had gotten permission from the guild to carry one as his own. The rest were scattered around the Great Tomb of Nazarick, although most of them stayed in the treasury, protected by the Avataras. There could only be one reason Albedo had come into possession of one of these secret treasures without his knowledge. The guild member who created her had given it to her. Aints Ulgaun valued majority rule. It was unacceptable to move the treasure everyone collected together around on one's own. Momonga was somewhat offended and felt he should probably take it back. But today was the last day. He decided to take that guildmate's feelings into account and leave the item where it was. That's far enough, Momonga said to Sebas and the Pleiades in a dignified tone when they'd reached the steps to the throne. Then he started up the stairs. But after he had gone up a couple, he realized he could still hear footsteps behind him and winced. Although, of course, the graphics of his skull face didn't move a bit. When it came down to it, NPCs were inflexible programs. They wouldn't take an order unless it was one of their set phrases. Momonga used NPCs so rarely that he had managed to forget that simple fact. Since the other guild members left, Momonga had been doing all he reasonably could to go treasure hunting and raise the funds necessary to maintain the Great Tomb of Nazarick. He never teamed up with other players. He stealthily avoided the difficult areas the guild had quested in when its members were still around. Every day he threw money into the treasury as if it was his job. Then he logged out. He didn't have much occasion to meet NPCs. Stand by. The footsteps stopped when he gave the correct command. He climbed the stairs and stood before the throne. He scrutinized Albedo without reserve. He hadn't really come to this room before. He couldn't remember ever taking a good look at her. I wonder what her backstory is. All he could remember was that she was captain of the Floor Guardians. She was also the most elite NPC in the Great Tomb of Nazarick. With curiosity fluttering in his chest, he accessed the menu to look up her info. And there was certainly info writing flooded his field of vision. Her backstory was as long as an epic poem. If he took his time reading it, the servers would shut down before he was done. If Momonga's expression could move, his face would have been screwed up in disbelief. He felt more or less like he'd stepped on a landmine. How could he have forgotten that the guild member who created Albedo was so obsessed with backstories? He was extremely disappointed in himself. He was the one who had looked it up, so he resigned himself to browsing the bio. He barely skimmed it, scrolling quickly to the bottom. The last thing it said caught his attention by the way, she's a bitch. His eyes nearly popped out of his head. Huh, what the heck, he yelped. No matter how many times he doubted his eyes and reread, the words didn't change. And no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't think of anything for them to mean besides the first thing that popped into his head. It's gotta be bitch. The insult all 41 members of the guild had set up at least one NPC. He wondered if someone would really give the character they created that sort of background. If he took his time and read the whole thing, maybe there was some deeper meaning. But some people came up with the craziest backstories, and the member who had created Albedo, Tabula Smaragdina, was one of those. So you're into that unexpected contrast, Tabula. Still, wasn't this going a bit too far? The NPCs the guild members made were like the legacy of the guild. If the one at the top of the hierarchy had this in her bio, it seemed pretty HRM. Was it okay to mess with someone's original NPC due to personal feelings? Momonga thought for a moment and then gave his answer. I'm gonna change it. Now that he was carrying the guild weapon, he was guild master in both name and substance. He figured it would be okay to exercise the privileges he'd mostly ignored in the past. Using the fuzzy logic of, if a guild member makes an error, it should be corrected, he broke through his hesitation. Momonga pointed his staff. Usually one would need the creator's toolkit to edit bios, but he could access them with his guild master privileges. A couple menu inputs later, and the sentence about being a bitch was gone. I guess that'll do. Then he thought for a moment and looked at the space he'd opened up. Maybe I should put something in there. This is so stupid. Momonga winced at his own idea and input the characters via the menu keyboard. It was a short sentence, and she's in love with Momonga. How embarrassing. He put his hands over his face. He felt he might collapse due to sheer mortification, as if he'd made up his own ideal lover and written a romance about it. He fidgeted. He was so embarrassed he considered changing it again, but he decided it was okay. It was the last day. This embarrassment would disappear in just a few more minutes. Plus, both sentences had the same amount of words. What perfection.